Greetings! Anton here with an H3VR devlog that's going to be taking place in the Unity editor today. Basically, the past week I decided to throw all of my continued effort just into getting our big outdoor winter take and hold level ready to play. It isn't ready quite yet, but because I got an explosive amount of things done this past week, it's going to be ready to go into alpha next Friday. So what I thought I would do is basically dive into the level and talk about some of the changes that are coming to the way take and hold plays as a result of being in a far larger space, as well as showing you folks basically some more stuff related to take and hold's AI and the way the sort of encounters function that's going to be super relevant to what is different about it in the winter level, which, by the way, the level's name has finally been chosen. It is Northeast Dakota. So let's dive right into stuff. Let's pop over here. Wonderful. So, to begin with, one of the biggest changes that are going to be coming to the sort of flow of take and hold when being played in a larger level has to do with the take phase. During the take phase, basically, several supply points become activated, a hold becomes activated, guards are spawned in those locations, and then as you play through the take phase, as you're running around getting your equipment, deciding when you're going to actually begin the take the hold, patrols are spawned. And the logic that I have used for patrol spawning and patrol regeneration over the course of things in this works really well with a small map like this and does not work at all in a big map. It's way too sparse. And I'm going to explain why. And so in part as a sort of baseline so that you can understand how different what I'm doing in the large level is. So let's start here. I'm going to actually Windows snipping tool this. Boop. Cool. So if we got our level here, the way this basically works is, let's just say that we have finished this hold point here, and then it is the system sort of is going, okay, this is the next hold point is going to be here, and there's a supply point active here, and there is a supply point active here. Let's just say there's a bunch of stuff happening under the hood where that is telling the system how to select those points. The actual holds are occurring in a sort of predefined sequence that I have authored. There's 10 of them, and it picks a random one when you start out of those 10. Unless you're playing an endless, then it just keeps tacking on more holds. And the way that it does that intelligently, as well as picking the supply points, is that there's something called basically like a safe position matrix built in. And what that is for each hold point, like this one here, there is a list of essentially safe holds and supply points that can be chosen so that the moment the hold ends, you don't have like guards shooting you from an adjacent one. So say I just finished this hold here, it isn't going to generate this supply point here because there could be a guard standing right here. I could be ending the hold right here, and then I could immediately come under fire from it. So there's a bunch of data embedded in the level that is there to tell the generation system what to do. And this is also used for generating the patrols. Because patrols in the small level are only regenerated when the system detects that you are standing in a supply point, what it basically goes, okay, what hold points can't be seen from that supply point? Pick a random one, generate a patrol, so it might pick this one here, and spawn a bunch of Sosigs there, and spawns it using a bunch of the sort of stored points in that hold, and then it basically generates a series of patrol points for that patrol from other random holds. So it might go one here, and it might pick one here, and then it might pick one here, and then it might pick one, I don't know, here. And so then we will actually, so this patrol would then path from here. They would all gather there. They'd come through here. They'd gather here. They'd come out here. They'd gather here. And then, yeah, probably here over to 4. And then they would path back to 1. So they would probably reverse their order, come back over here, come through here, etc. And then loop around that. Now, this works in a level of about this complexity and size because of the way the hallways have been designed. There is 1 to 2 paths between any 2 points in this map of importance, which means that there's a high likelihood you're going to run into any patrol traversing this map, while at the same time, if you hear a patrol or see one, there's likely one way for you to circumvent that patrol once you become aware of it to be able to get to some other point. So there's this really nice balance between I want to run into encounters and be pressured by them, but at the same time, if I don't have any, ammo on me, or if it's a fight I don't want to take, I have options in terms of trying to circumvent and get around them. And that works, once again, because there's a fairly consistent number of paths between any 2 important points of a certain scale. This completely falls apart in the big map. Over here, in our Northest Dakota map here, we've got a lot more hold points and a lot more open space and possible paths. If I select the holds here, I can turn on some of their gizmos. There we can actually see their names being written. And so you can imagine that that same patrol logic applied here, even with... I used the sort of safe position matrix a little different in this map because it's used to generate what supply points should show up and generate what where is safe. I used it in this map a little bit more to denote proximity. Let's turn on our supply point. There we go. So in the case of this map here, the safe position matrix for this hold is going to only contain supply points that both don't have line of sight to it, so it's wouldn't contain supply 1 here, but it's only going to have ones that are within a reasonable distance. So for hold 1 here, I think the active supply points are in its safe position matrix are here because there's enough obstruction, here because it's far enough away, and then down in here because there's plenty of obstruction, but it doesn't contain this and it doesn't contain that. So that definitely means that I can still use that if I want to spawn a patrol, but as soon as that patrol gets created, it's not going to be a good time because of the fact that the patrol system, as it's currently authored, uses random holds for its patrol points. So it could very easily, I could start in hold 1 here. It could create for me a patrol, over here in hold 3. But then the patrol points for that could be like over here, and then like up here, and then over here, and over here. But because of the way that the seeds work, if I started down in hold 0, the entire part of the map that I would end up playing through for this hold sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, would be something like this. So it would create the patrol and then immediately walk the patrol away, never to be seen again during play. And so I needed to take a completely different approach to encounter design for the take phase in this map. So how did I go about this? I did some cool editor gizmo visualizations, and this is as a larger point of game development, a great example of why one should always invest in tools early. If you are trying to work with space, if you're trying to work with data that can be visualized, it is almost always worth just writing yourself a few debugging gizmos to draw all of that information directly to the screen instead of just assuming it's in the form that you think you're generating it in. I actually ran into an issue related to the pathfinding system where I was getting junk out of it, and I would have never caught it had I not made all the nifty gizmos you're about to see. So to basically to solve this problem, the large map here uses a completely different patrol system. I have named sentry patrols. And the idea for this is that I have gone around and manually authored about, I think, like 450 individual points of interest across the map. There are these little vertical dots you can see here. And what I would basically describe these as is a place that a patrol could path to that could theoretically be interesting, or a good place for an agent to stop and take a look around that isn't in a supply point or in a hold point. And the idea basically is that when a patrol would be spawned, they would be spawned where they should be spawned, but then they would path to points of interest near where I know the player is going to need to go. So a take phase begins. We have 1 to 3 supply points. We have a hold point, and we have where the player is starting as interesting zones of the map to work with. And so but of course this is one of those there are things that are very easy to say that are much harder computationally to come up with. So if you're like, I just need some spots near some supply points, I can just say that as a sentence, and it's a very simple thing. But actually computing that really, really fast on demand is, that can actually be fairly expensive. In the case of the computation that I do here for this map, it actually takes like a good 10 seconds to do that well. And so that's all pre-computed. And so I've got some gizmos to show that. So what I essentially do is I have this, what's called a sentry patrol group. These are all of the points, as you can see here, that are, let's just grab one of these. So like this point here, those are all in this list. And then what I do is I brute force pathfind between every single hold and every single supply point on the map and every point in that list. And as I do that, I keep track of how long that path is. Not like by flight distance, by an agent pathing to it, and then sort them so that basically each hold and each supply point has a list of all of those points that are closer to it than anything else. And this looks really cool when we visualize it. So if we go over to hold 0 here, and over here in our sentry patrol system, tell it to draw all paths. Here's a list of the 5 points that are closest to hold 0 than any other hold. I can click draw all paths, which we can see a little easier in wireframe there. And you can see those are the 5 points of relevance, and this is the path to essentially the pathing route of the hold. I believe that's actually where the little floating globe shows. And I can actually, though it'll slow the editor down a little bit, I can actually turn this on for all of the points. This is another one of those, like, when in doubt, if you're visualizing a huge data set that is in arrays, hue shift your lines. It makes it way easier to tell the difference between groups at a glance. But yeah, so this gives us an idea of all of these sort of points of relevance for each hold, and I can also do that relative to each supply point. Aren't gizmos pretty? Wonderful stuff. So what that allows me to then do is imagine what would be an interesting patrol sequence to generate. So, like, if I look at my notes here, the idea here is that when a take phase begins, what's going to happen is that a set of patrols, one for each of the active supply points, is going to be generated. It will be generated near the supply point, but not in the supply point. And then its pathing will be basically based on a random one of those points that is near one of the supply points, a random point that is near where the player currently is at the moment of the beginning of the take phase, another random point near the hold point, and then another in the actual supply point. So we'll get this loop where it's almost like the patrol is actively checking in on where is actually relevant to the take phase, which, because the level is larger, like I wouldn't want to necessarily do this in the smaller take and hold level, because that's a small enough level that the patrols would very, very quickly just cluster in a small subset of the space, because the hallways are narrow and such. Whereas in this level, it's large, the space is large enough that I want to really increase the chance that if you're taking a sort of direct path between points of interest that are relevant to you, supply points and the active hold, that you're going to be way more likely to run into a patrol. So that's how that is going to function. And I'm going to spawn one of those each for a supply point. I'm going to spawn one from the hold point that actually is more likely to come directly at where you're starting. So you'll probably encounter that one first. And then a third type that I'm working on is going to be called a hunter patrol. And the idea behind that is it's sort of a responsive patrol, in that once you hit a supply point, if any of the agents were essentially detected you before you took the supply point down, another patrol coming from the last hold you were in will be generated and essentially be responding to that occurring at the supply point, which ends up being a sort of stealth benefit to taking a supply point down stealthily. If you take everyone down and none of them end up hitting the investigating or sort of active skirmish states, then that hunter patrol won't be spawned, even though the regular ones will still be spawned and regenerated. So yeah, so that's just to give you an idea of what is going on with trying to just make the take phase more interesting and dynamic and a little denser without being overwhelming. Because, like, how to put it, like when I was working on the Winter Wasteland during the holidays, a lot of times my response to things was just throw more enemies at the problem, when folks found it being a little bit too sparse, which obviously just becomes overwhelming and doesn't solve the core problem of having more enemies occur in more interesting contexts or reactive contexts, or spawning in ways that make an interesting decision between, I'm going to take the fastest route here, but I'm going to run into more enemies, or I'm going to take a more circuitous, safe, watch my cover route and be less likely to be surprised by a patrol. So hopefully this ends up being a smarter way to make these encounters function under the hood. And then beyond that, just to obviously, as you can see here, we actually have all of our hold points roughed in, which I'm super excited about. Let's turn those gizmos off. One problem with doing gizmos when you've got hundreds and hundreds of them is that the Unity editor really does begin to chug after a while. But as you can see here, if I turn on all of these are still going to be fairly rough. When the alpha of this launches next week, just be aware that some of these hold points will not be good yet. I filled them in. I've gotten some initial cover down. I'm still playing around with the density and proximity of the sort of hold targets, and they break down into several different sorts of types, which I'm going to show you here. There are certain kinds of holds that are designed to be very unidirectional, where enemies are primarily going to be coming from a 90-degree arc or less, from 45 in each direction, and that all of the targets are going to spawn largely in that single direction, either just inside the hold barrier or just outside of it. There are certain sorts of holds that are very omnidirectional, like this, where this is sort of set up almost to be this like very, very tiny little town area where you're going to be sort of figure eighting and moving in and out. It's very dynamic movement as enemies come from many different directions and ranges. So hold 28 here will end up being like the most mixed and dynamic. There's ones like this that aren't quite unidirectional. There's going to be threats coming from over, to the north and to the west here from our vantage point, but you're still going to have a lot of cover to work with, but a larger area that you're going to have to consider in terms of hitting targets. And then I've got a couple other experiments in here. Where is it? There's one here. And once again, I don't know if these are all good ideas. And so this is going to definitely be iterated with over time. But in the case of, which number are you? Hold 22 here. The idea for this is that the starting node is actually up all the way in the tower. We'll actually have a bunch of defenders for it. All of the nodes will be easiest to shoot up when you're up in the tower, and your enemies are going to be coming from fairly long range. So this is very much a sniper hold, if you want to play it that way. If you want to play it down on the ground with a little more cover, especially it'll be a lot harder to be hit omnidirectionally here, but obviously you're going to have to be looking up, not towards your targets, to take out the points. So once again, a lot of these are experiments. The benefit of having 32 holds in a single map is I've been able to play around and really and design a whole bunch of different distributions and ideas for what makes interesting hold target distributions and enemy approach distributions. I love this. Hold 19 over here is really fun. So you're almost entirely getting enemies coming from up on our escarpments here at quite a range. You've got a ton of cover to work with, ramps and ladders and such. But it's wide enough though that if you let Sosig slip in, you can actually get flanked back here, which absolutely happened to me last night. So yeah, got a cool one up here. Once again, there's so much more verticality to the designs of these. I am really excited to see what you folks and how you end up faring. It's challenging in, I feel, a very, very different way than the small take and hold level. The small take and hold level is very much is very, very high on aim duels at short range. Oh, there's someone with a shotgun right there. I just need to hit them within a second. And there's 2 to 3 very, very narrow apertures that I'm watching to defend. This is far more about actually just perceiving targets at range in a far wider area that they could be coming from and making significantly longer range shots and making that decision of whether you're going to expose yourself to return fire to take a shot that takes a little bit longer to acquire. So of course, I have done something absolutely evil with the Sosig AI, which I don't have an easy way to demonstrate working here, but you'll all get to experience it next week, which is that many of you know from playing some of the other modes, the Sosigs don't lead their targets at all, which means that if you are moving fast laterally, or frankly put, even you can be moving almost exactly at them from a distance, and they will never hit you, because they're not trying to fire at where you're going to be. They're always firing at where you were at the moment of them firing. And because bullets have travel time, they will never hit you. Or rather, they didn't used to ever hit you. They now actually do advance. They fire ahead of their targets with some fuzziness to their estimation. They're not perfect at it. Importantly, there's a maximum estimation ahead in terms of seconds that they can make, and it varies a bunch. And when they are suppressed or concussed or at greater ranges, it's built in that they misestimate the distance that they think they're firing at, sort of thing. So there's a whole bunch of very human-like imperfection in it, but it is a big difference. If you have been relying on, oh, if I just keep going super straight on sprint, I can't be hit, that will no longer be the case in these larger maps. You shouldn't probably notice any difference in smaller maps, but believe me, at 100 to 200 meter ranges, the difference is quite significant now for it. So, which honestly, I think makes this play way better, even though it's a bit harder. If you're like, no, taking hold is hard enough, just be aware that the arcade difficulty for the Sosig AI that you can select in the main menu does not have that estimation ability at all. So they will keep the classic behavior. And then the last thing I wanted to cover, which is almost fully functional, that I'm super excited about, obviously necessary for a new level, is that level selection is now in the Take and Hold lobby scene. You can see here that there's a next and a previous button. Any of you who've been using Worst Mod will recognize the sort of like having a name and an author tab for the level. I have been working with Nathan, who works on Worst Mod, to try to make this migration as smooth as possible. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap between this sort of going into alpha and those mods being able to be updated. I think changes only on the Worst Mod side will be needed. It might need some actual changes in the levels themselves for the data to be filled in. But I'm working with him, and this is that when this goes to alpha, this is not going to be going on the alpha 1 branch. It's going to be going on a completely separate branch that's going to be called like Take and Hold Alpha. You probably want to disable custom levels if you decide to jump onto that branch next Friday. I can't guarantee you they will still load correctly because of the way that Worst Mod works. This is primarily to give Nathan enough time to update things. So we'll have this transition period of a couple weeks where this will be an alpha, and then we'll actually migrate either to the alpha 1 branch or just a full release for update 99, at which point the new logic will prevail, and any custom levels that have not been updated to this new system will probably not work correctly. So just so you're aware, I know it can be a pain to have to install a bunch of stuff and then uninstall it. So this is just a fair warning, and that's why I'm not putting it on the Alpha 1 branch, because I don't want to spring this on anyone, just because I know download times and install times and things like that. So yeah, so as I said, next Friday, when this is ready, it will go on to its own branch called Take and Hold Alpha. So, but yeah, in working with Nathan, we're going to make it so that everything just sort of like appends to the level list, way more cleanly integrated here, and should hopefully also do things like save the last level that you played and such. So trying to make this transition with all the modded content as smooth as humanly possible. So yeah, so that, I think that just about does it for this week. I hope you're excited to play the level. As I said, I sort of put everything else on hold after I got some inertia on this level, and I'll admit I sort of went just full-blown workaholic this week, doing like 12 to 14 hour days to get all of the holds in and the supply points in some form, and get a lot more pathing in there, and beginning the testing process. But I'm super excited with it. It's simultaneously familiar. It's the Take and Hold that you've played a whole bunch of, but at the same time just a very, very different pace, and I think in many ways just a different psychological experience because of just the wind and the sort of blasted barren environment and how it feels to defend those various forts. So I'm super pleased with it, and yeah, I'm looking forward to having those of you who are interested dive in next Friday in our first big test of this level. So I'm going to return to work now, and I will see you all then. Peace.